In the dark silence of space, Earth's listening stations always worked without rest, catching every whisper that moved across the stars. On a quiet night shift, most scientists were bored, drinking cold coffee and checking empty screens. They expected only the usual static, small signals from satellites or faint echoes of distant stars. Nothing exciting ever came through. But then, one small station on the edge of the Nevada desert received something different. A signal, strange and sharp, cut through the noise. At first, it looked like random static, full of clicks and pulses. The computers labeled it as background interference. The older scientists ignored it. They had seen thousands of false alarms before. But a young technician named David leaned closer to his headset, his eyes narrowed as he listened again. The pattern was too precise. It was not natural. It was not random. David replayed it again and again. His fingers shook as he slowed the recording down. In the clicking and pulsing, he thought he heard a rhythm. It was almost like a voice, not words, but something shaped, like meaning. He felt cold on his skin. His heart beat faster. The signal repeated every few minutes, as if something out there wanted to make sure it was heard. He called over his supervisor, an older man who sighed before putting on the headphones. For a moment the man frowned, then shook his head. "It's just noise. Don't waste time," he said. But David could not let it go. He copied the recording and ran it through the translation software. The screen filled with strange symbols, characters that did not match any human language. The letters danced across, the display glowing like tiny stars. The program kept trying to match them but failed again and again. David stayed after his shift, alone in the control room. The desert outside was silent, the stars shining like cold fires. He pressed his earphones tighter. The signal kept playing, steady, calm, repeating itself as if it had no end. The more he listened, the more he was certain. It was not meant for them, it was not meant for humans at all, but by accident, humans had heard it. That night he sent a copy to a friend at another observatory. Within hours, other scientists were pulled into the mystery. They compared the signal to every known broadcast in history, radio, military, and space probes. Nothing matched. The frequencies were strange, too deep, too complex. No natural source could explain them. One scientist whispered that it was like listening to a warning bell from another world. The media did not know. The government had not been told. In the wide, secret halls of research centers, only a handful of people sat awake through the night watching the signal repeat. One young woman from the translation team found something strange. "Look here," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "There is a pattern inside the pattern." Hidden deep in the noise, the pulses formed a sequence of numbers, clear and repeating. Prime numbers, basic, universal, a sign of intelligence. Now, they were certain someone or something had sent this message, but why? And why had humans heard it, when clearly it was not for them? The scientists tried to break more of it, but each time they got only fragments, words that were not words, maps that looked like star charts, lines pointing into the void. By dawn, a rumor spread inside the facility. Some said the signal contained a warning, others thought it was a distress call. A few whispered it might be a trap. David only knew one thing for sure. The message was not an accident. It was meant for someone else. But fate had placed it in human ears. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the sand in gold, the signal was still playing, repeating like a heartbeat, steady and cold. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with both fear and wonder. Somewhere out there, across the endless stars, something was coming, and the message was trying to tell them. He whispered to himself, "If this is not for us, then who is supposed to hear it?" And in that moment, the story of humanity's greatest discovery and greatest danger had begun. The signal did not stop. It kept echoing through the antennas night after night, repeating like a steady drumbeat. In the silence of space, more and more scientists joined the study, and soon the control room turned into a battlefield of ideas. Some believed it was nothing but cosmic noise. Others whispered that it was a message, a warning, or even a trap. The truth lay hidden in the strange patterns of sound. The first real breakthrough came when they connected the signal to one of the world's most powerful AI translation systems. The machine scanned it for hours, comparing every pulse and every gap with thousands of languages, human and non-human. Nothing matched. But then the AI began to build fragments, half words, half symbols, strange shapes of meaning. The scientists leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. The fragments showed two things. The first was a sequence of numbers, simple enough for even a child to understand. The second was a repeating set of star positions. At first it looked random, but then a young astrophysicist pointed at the screen with shaking hands. "That's our galaxy," she whispered. The pattern was a map, and Earth was glowing at the edge of it. The room fell silent. If Earth was on the map, then whoever sent the message already knew about humanity. Some felt fear, others felt excitement. The mystery grew heavier with every second. David, the young technician who first heard the signal, stared at the glowing map. He could not escape the feeling that this was not an invitation, but a warning. The AI continued to work. The pulses of sound twisted into lines of strange code. The software began to display words, not full words, but shards that carried weight. Enemy, approaching, destroy. The team froze. The message was not a greeting. It was a warning of something terrible moving through the galaxy. David's supervisor rubbed his forehead. "This was not meant for us," he said in a tired voice. Someone out there was warning their allies, not humans. But the fact was clear. Humans had heard it. Humans had seen the map. Humans had read the fragments, whether or not they were supposed to. The secret was now in their hands. The debate grew. Should they tell the world? Should governments know? Should armies prepare? Or should they bury the message and pretend it never existed? A woman from the translation team shook her head. "We can't hide this. If it's real, something is coming, and if it's not, we need to prove it wrong." Arguments filled the air, but in the middle of the chaos, the AI flashed again. New fragments appeared. This time it was a diagram, lines and curves that looked like ships, massive ships, weapons shining on their surface. It was not a human design, but the image was clear enough to send chills down every spine. It was the picture of war. David leaned closer. "These ships, they are not ours, but look at this section." He pointed at a row of symbols under the drawing. Hidden codes glowed across the diagram. They looked like tactical commands, battle instructions meant for another race. Somewhere out there, another civilization was supposed to see this, prepare, and fight. But they had not. Instead, humans had caught it. The realization struck like thunder. The warning had missed its target. The intended defenders of the galaxy never received it. By accident, Earth had intercepted the message. Now humanity carried the knowledge, and with that knowledge came responsibility. For the next few days, the signal became the only thing that mattered. Teams of experts worked without rest, coffee cups piling high on tables, eyes red from staring at glowing screens. They pulled out fragments of strategies, maps of star systems, mentions of fleets destroyed. The picture became clearer. Somewhere, beyond the edge of the galaxy, an enemy force was moving closer, burning worlds into ash. Fear spread among the scientists, but also a strange excitement. Humans had always looked at the stars and wondered if they were alone. Now they knew they were not. And even though the message was not for them, it was in their hands. Humanity had become part of a war they did not even understand. David walked out of the control room one night and stared up at the desert sky. The stars looked peaceful. But he knew better now. Somewhere among them a storm was coming. He thought of the words the AI had shown: enemy, destroy, approaching. He whispered to himself. They warned someone else. But we were the ones who listened. Back in the lab, the AI produced one last chilling fragment, a countdown, numbers dropping slowly. It was not clear what they meant. Days, years, light years, no one knew. But it was clear the signal was not only a warning, it was a clock. And it was ticking. The scientists stared at the numbers, pale and speechless. The signal had changed everything. Humanity could no longer pretend it was alone. The question was no longer if they were ready, but if they even had a choice. And as the countdown continued, the fate of Earth and the entire galaxy began to turn. The message was not for humans, but humans had heard it. And by hearing it, they had stepped onto a path that would change history forever. The signal spread quietly through hidden channels. Governments were finally informed. Secret meetings were held behind closed doors. Leaders argued, generals shouted, and scientists tried to explain what little they knew. The message was not for humans, but now it belonged to them. The translation. Fragments spoke of war, destruction, and an approaching enemy. Yet no one could answer the most important question. When weeks passed, the signal kept repeating from deep space, a constant reminder that something was coming. Then one night, alarms shook the control room. A technician screamed as his screen lit up with strange readings. Something massive had entered the solar system. Far beyond Pluto, a dark shape moved in silence. It was not a natural object. It was a ship. Telescopes locked onto the intruder. The first clear image sent shivers through every observer. The ship was enormous, far larger than anything humans had ever built. Its hull glowed faintly with alien lights. Its shape was smooth, curved, and alive, as if grown rather than built. The world held its breath. Was this the enemy the warning spoke of, or was this the intended receiver of the signal? David was called back to the station. He had been the first to hear the message, and now he stood before the screen, staring at the impossible sight. His heart pounded in his chest. "It's not harvesters," he whispered. "This is different." The ship slowed near Jupiter. Its massive shadow stretched across the planet's storms. Then, without warning, a smaller craft separated from the main body, gliding toward Earth's orbit. Panic swept. Through military channels, warships scrambled into position, missiles were armed, fighters launched into the black sky. Humanity had prepared. But deep inside, everyone knew their weapons were nothing compared to what they were facing. The alien craft did not attack, instead it hovered waiting. Then a signal pulsed out loud and clear. It was not the same as the first warning. This one was sharper, more direct, yet it carried the same strange rhythm. The scientists rushed to translate, and soon the AI produced the first words humans ever received from an alien race. "We expected. Others, not you." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the screen. The message repeated. "You were not meant to hear this," David whispered. "But we did." The alien craft finally spoke again. "The enemy comes. They destroy all. We sent warnings to the ones prepared, but they are gone," the scientist gasped. The intended receivers. The powerful allies mentioned in the fragments were no more, destroyed before they could even respond. That meant humanity was alone. The alien ship hovered near Earth's orbit, never firing, never threatening. It seemed confused, as if unsure what to do with this fragile new species that had stumbled into the greatest war of the galaxy. Finally, another message arrived. "If you heard the signal, you must decide, fight or perish." Panic erupted across Earth, news leaked, and the world shook with fear. Some demanded surrender, others screamed for war. Protests filled cities, armies prepared weapons. Leaders gave speeches about survival and destiny. Humanity stood on the edge of history, facing a decision it never asked for. Meanwhile, the alien ship remained near Jupiter, silent, watching. Its presence was like a storm cloud over Earth. The military called it the Observer. For weeks it stayed, sending no more messages, letting humanity struggle with the weight of the truth. Then, one night David was alone in the lab again. The alien signal flared back to life. He stared at the translation screen as new words formed. "You are small, unready, weak, but you are clever. You broke the code meant for others, perhaps you can survive." The message was both insult and hope. It was clear the aliens had not expected humans to ever play a part. Yet humans had listened, humans had answered, and now humans were the only ones left. At the same time, a darker truth emerged. Military satellites caught glimpses of movement far beyond Neptune, massive shadows sliding through the darkness. Warships unlike any seen before, cold black with red glowing lines across their hulls. The harvesters, the enemy from the warning. Fear spread faster than light. Humanity's fleets were nothing compared to what was coming. The aliens had been right. Humans were small, weak, unready, yet they had no choice. The observer finally sent one last line before going silent again. Prepare. They are closer than you think. David closed his eyes. The weight of the galaxy pressed against his chest. Humanity was never meant to hear the message, never meant to fight this war. But fate had twisted the stars, and now they were the last line of defense. As the world prepared for what was coming, David whispered to himself, if the message wasn't meant for us, then why do I feel like it chose us anyway? In the dark silence of space, the shadows kept moving, and the first contact had already changed everything. Factories lit up across the planet. Smoke and fire poured from towers as machines worked without pause. Humanity had decided they would not wait quietly for death. They would fight. For the first time in history, every nation turned its power toward one single goal. Building warships, spaceports that once carried satellites and explorers now became shipyards of steel and light. Old rockets were torn apart and reforged into weapons. Giant carriers rose. From the deserts, from frozen tundras, from hidden bases under the sea. Engineers worked with trembling hands. Soldiers trained in silence, knowing the enemy they were preparing to face was far beyond anything they had known. The observer ship, near Jupiter, remained silent. It simply watched, a dark giant drifting among the storms. Sometimes it sent brief signals, short bursts of alien data. At first, humans could not understand them, but slowly the AI cracked small pieces. They were instructions, blueprints, designs for weapons never seen before. Alien technology was being handed to humanity piece by piece. The scientists gasped at the complexity: fusion beams, shield matrices, engines that could bend gravity. But building these weapons was slow. The world rushed, cutting corners, risking accidents. Entire cities worked day and night. Families gave up comfort. Children saw their parents only through screens. The planet had become a forge, and Earth itself felt like a war factory. David stood inside one of the new command centers, rows of glowing screens surrounding him. He had been pulled from the observatory and now worked alongside military officers. His role was strange. He was not a soldier, but he was the one who had first heard the signal, and somehow that gave him authority. The officers often looked at him for guidance, as if he carried the voice of the stars. Reports arrived daily. Harvester scouts had been seen again, shadows beyond Neptune. One probe was destroyed before it could send full images, but the fragments showed the same nightmare. Ships like floating, fortresses, black hulls burning with red light, weapons larger than skyscrapers. The enemy was real, and they were closer. Still, hope burned. Humans had always been underestimated. They were weak compared to others, fragile compared to machines. But they were stubborn, clever, and desperation often created miracles. Across the skies, the first human warships took flight. They were crude at first, massive steel, beasts with missile bays and laser cannons. But mixed inside them were alien improvements, shields that could shimmer like blue light, engines that could push them faster than ever before. Crowds gathered to watch as the first fleet launched. Families cried, soldiers saluted. The sight of Earth's first true space armada filled people with both fear and pride. Yet whispers of doubt spread too. Some said the ships were too few, too weak, too rushed. Some wondered if humanity was only building coffins for their bravest sons and daughters. David heard these whispers and carried them like a weight on his chest. He knew they were true, but he also knew there was no choice. The observer finally moved again. A smaller drone detached and flew toward the human fleet. It released a signal, which the AI translated quickly. Your enemy has no mercy. They erase without question. To face them, you must think like them, strike without hesitation. Do you understand? The generals answered with silence, but their eyes were hard. They understood. Training began in orbit. Human pilots flew their fighters against automated drones. Commanders drilled their fleets in formation maneuvers. Mistakes were punished with failure alarms. There was no time for weakness. Soldiers who could not keep up were sent back. The fleet had to be perfect because the first battle might also be the last. Still, humanity's spirit shined. Soldiers painted their ships with flags, names of families, and symbols of courage. They played music over the radios during long training runs. Some laughed, some prayed, some cried quietly in the dark, but all of them were ready. David watched the fleet from a space station window. Hundreds of ships glittered like stars, drifting in formation. He felt both awe and fear. He knew the enemies. Size. He knew humanity was still small. But he also felt something else. Defiance. For the first time, Earth was not waiting. Earth was answering. Then came the warning. Satellites at the edge of the system caught sight of movement. Dozens of Harvester scouts breaking into real space. The countdown from the original message was running out. The war was no longer far away. It was here. The observer sent one final signal before going dark again. Your test begins now. David turned to the generals, his voice steady though his heart raced. They're coming, he said, and we have no choice but to meet them. Across the fleet, alarms rang. Pilots strapped into cockpits, warships powered engines. Families on Earth looked to the sky. The great assembly was over. The waiting had ended. Humanity's first battle for survival was about to begin. The black sky over the moon filled with light. Humanity's first fleet was waiting, engines burning blue as ships held position. Fighters circled like swarms of steel insects. Warships stood in lines, their guns locked on the void. Every pilot, every soldier, every commander held their breath, because the Harvester scouts had arrived. They came in silence, dark ships sliding from the shadows beyond space. At first they looked like asteroids, giant black stones drifting with no life. But then their hulls opened, glowing with deep red veins of energy. The enemy revealed its true face, machines built for only one purpose, destruction. The first shot was fired by a human cruiser, a beam of light that tore across the dark. It hit the nearest Harvester scout. The impact flared but left no damage. The alien ship turned its massive weapons, and with one pulse of red fire, the human cruiser split apart like glass, screams of its crew lost in the vacuum. The battle had begun. Human fighters rushed forward, weaving between the larger warships. Missiles streaked out, filling space with trails of fire. Explosions bloomed. One Harvester scout took heavy hits, its hull cracking. For a moment, cheers filled the human comms, but then the alien ship shifted, repairing itself with terrifying speed. Metal flowed like liquid, sealing wounds. The cheers turned to silence. David stood inside the command center on Earth's orbital station. Watching the feeds, his hands clenched the console. They heal, he whispered. The generals barked orders, but their faces were pale. The human fleet fought with everything it had. Beams of light carved through the dark. Missiles turned space into storms. Dozens of Harvester scouts burned. Some shattered under concentrated fire, but every loss was heavy. Human ships exploded by the dozen. Fighters blinked out of existence like sparks fading in wind. Then the observer ship near Jupiter stirred. Its massive frame shifted, and suddenly, its silent drones streaked across space. They entered the battle without hesitation. Blue energy cut through the Harvester shields. For the first time, the enemy staggered. The human commanders saw it. They quickly ordered their fleets to copy the drone's attack pattern. The AI translated the observer's bursts of data into commands. Strike here, aim for the core, use crossfire. The human fleet obeyed, and suddenly the tide began to turn. A Harvester scout erupted under human fire, its red core burning out. Another was trapped in a net of beams and missiles, breaking into fragments. The fleet cheered even as losses mounted. Humanity had found a way to hurt the enemy. David leaned closer to the screens. The message, he whispered. It wasn't just a warning. It was instructions. The fragments of code inside the first signal now made sense. They were battle tactics hidden within the warning. Whoever had sent the message had known this fight would come, but victory was still far away. For every scout destroyed, more emerged from the dark. The human fleet was bleeding, ships shattered, pilots lost. The moon's orbit became a graveyard of wreckage and fire. Then, a new sound filled the comms. Not human, not machine. It was the observer, sending one clear signal across all channels. "Stand! Do not retreat!" The humans obeyed, ships regrouped. Formations tightened, and together with the alien drones they delivered their strongest strike. For hours the battle raged. Space itself seemed to burn with war. At last, the surviving Harvester scouts began to retreat, their red light fading. Into the shadows of deep space, humanity had not been destroyed. They had survived the first battle. Cheers shook the comms. Soldiers cried. Families watching from Earth screamed in relief. But the joy was heavy. The losses were terrible, entire fleets gone, thousands of lives ended. The moon's surface glowed with falling wreckage. David stood silently, his chest heavy with grief and hope. Humanity had stood against the Harvesters and lived. But deep inside he knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The scouts had been testing them. The real war was still coming. The observer sent one final message before going silent again. "You can fight, but greater storms are near." David whispered into the silence of the control room. We heard the message by mistake. But maybe it was no mistake at all. His eyes lifted to the stars. Still burning, still waiting. The galaxy had noticed humanity, and there was no turning back. Smoke still drifted across the moon's orbit. Broken warships floated like cold graves in the silence. The first battle was over. Humanity had survived, but only barely. Every survivor knew the truth. The Harvester scouts were only the beginning. The real war was still to come. On Earth, leaders from every nation gathered in emergency councils. The battle had shown them two things. First, humans could fight. Second, they could not win alone. It was time to build something greater, an alliance that had never existed before. Messages were sent across secret channels. The observer ship near Jupiter finally responded. For the first time since its arrival, it moved closer to Earth, drifting into orbit like a silent guardian. From its hull, beams of blue light stretched out, forming strange holograms of data. The scientists gasped. The aliens were giving more than warnings now, they were offering knowledge. David watched as the holograms filled the command chamber, maps of distant star systems, blueprints of weapons far beyond human imagination, and tactical diagrams against Harvester fleets. The voice of the observer echoed through the speakers, slow, heavy, and ancient. "You are not ready, but you are willing. That makes you different." The generals leaned forward. "Will you fight with us?" they asked. The alien voice was silent for a moment before answering. "We cannot fight as you do. Our numbers are few, our time is ending, but we will guide, we will share. If you fall, the galaxy falls." Thus the Great Alliance was born, not an alliance of equals, but a desperate partnership between a fragile, young race and an ancient watcher of the stars. Humanity opened its shipyards to alien designs. Warships grew stronger, new weapons burned brighter, shields shimmered blue against the void. The observer drones trained human pilots in maneuvers that twisted through gravity, turning weakness into advantage. Still, fear never left the hearts of men and women. The Harvesters were older, larger, more ruthless. Every training session reminded humans how close they stood to destruction. Yet something else grew in the shadows of fear: respect. The aliens began to see that humans were not as weak as they thought. Humans learned fast. They adapted, they endured. One day during training, an alien drone deliberately disabled its shields. It faced 5 human fighters in a mock battle. The pilots fought hard, weaving around its weapons, and finally destroyed it. When the drone reactivated, a single message flashed across every screen. Clever. The word spread through the ranks like fire. Humans were clever. Humans were dangerous. And perhaps, just perhaps, humans could win, but the Harvesters had not been silent. In the weeks after their retreat, they sent their own signal. It echoed across the system, a message clear and merciless: surrender or be erased. Their voice was mechanical, cold, filled with a power that chilled every listener. Cities fell into silence. Families huddled around screens. The enemy had spoken directly. The governments debated. Should they answer? Some argued for peace, but no one truly believed peace was possible. The harvesters were not conquerors, they were erasers. They did not take prisoners. They did not build empires. They only destroyed. The observer confirmed it. They have no leaders, no mercy. They are machines of hunger. They will not stop until every star is silent. Humanity understood. There was no surrender. There was only war. So the alliance grew stronger. Human fleets now sailed beside alien drones. New warships launched daily. Faster. Deadlier. Shields glowing like fire. Pilots trained with alien instructors. Engineers fused human creativity with alien precision. The world itself became a forge. David walked through the great shipyard above Earth, watching workers float. Between half-built cruisers, sparks flew, engines roared. The scale was overwhelming. Never before had humanity moved as one. Nations that once fought over land now shared blueprints. Enemies that once traded bullets now traded fuel and steel. Humanity had become a single force, yet David knew the cost. He saw the exhaustion in every face, the fear in every soldier's eyes. He felt the weight of silence when families whispered goodbye. The alliance was strong, but strength was not enough. Time was running out. One evening, as Earth spun silently, below the station the observer sent another message. This one was not about weapons or tactics, it was about destiny. The first battle has shown the galaxy something it has not seen before. Humans fight even when hope is small. That is why the message reached you. That is why you must carry it. David felt the words sink deep. Perhaps it had never been an accident. Perhaps humans were always meant to hear the signal. If that was true, then the galaxy had placed its survival into their fragile hands. And so the Great Alliance prepared for the next storm. Warships patrolled the skies. Fleets gathered near the moon. Soldiers stood ready. Families whispered prayers. The countdown from the first message continued to drop, slow but steady, ticking toward an unknown hour. David looked out at the stars and spoke softly. We were not meant to hear the message, but maybe we were the only ones willing to listen. In the distance, far beyond Neptune's orbit, shadows moved again. The harvesters were coming, and this time they would not send scouts. This time they would send war. The silence before the storm was heavy. Across the solar system, fleets stood ready. Warships drifted in formation, engines humming low. Fighters floated like swarms of restless birds. Every screen glowed with warnings. Every radar scanned the void. Humanity and its alien allies had built the Great Alliance, and now they waited. They knew the harvesters were coming. And then, the darkness shifted. From beyond Neptune, shadows appeared. At first they looked like endless black clouds. But soon the details came clear. Dozens, hundreds, then thousands of harvester warships slipped from the void. Their hulls burned with red light. Their weapons glowed like molten fire. They moved in silence, perfect and merciless. A tide of destruction rolling toward Earth. Alarms screamed across every ship. Pilots strapped in. Commanders barked orders. The final war had begun. The first clash came near Saturn. Human destroyers launched missiles in waves, streaks of fire cutting across the void. Alien drones darted ahead, releasing beams of blue light that bent through gravity. The harvesters answered with storms of red plasma. Entire human squadrons vanished in seconds, ships split open like broken glass still. The fleets pushed forward. David stood inside the command center, his eyes locked on the battle feeds. He watched as ships he had seen built, ships he had watched launch with cheering crowds, were torn apart in silence. His chest felt heavy, but then he saw something else. Human pilots adapting, twisting through enemy fire, using speed and tricks the harvesters did not expect. The battle stretched for hours. Space itself seemed to burn. Saturn's rings shattered under the fire. Chunks of ice spinning into chaos. Human fleets fought beside alien drones, forming traps, crossfires, ambushes. Every destroyed harvester ship gave them hope. But every human loss was like a knife. The galaxy itself seemed to watch. Then the enemy unleashed something new. From the center of their fleet, colossal ships emerged, larger than cities. Their cores glowed with a red light so bright it hurt the eyes. Their weapons fired beams that cut through dozens of ships in a single strike. The humans called them Harvest Titans. Panic filled the comms. Fleets scattered, shields broke. The Titans advanced like gods of fire, unstoppable, invincible. For a moment, the Alliance trembled. Hope cracked, but the observer ship stirred once more. Its deep voice echoed through every channel. Use the code. David's eyes widened. He rushed to the AI systems, pulling up the old fragments of the first signal. The strange patterns, the hidden tactics, they were not just battle plans. They were the secret to breaking the Titans. He shouted the coordinates. Target the core, aim for the pattern of red light, strike together. The Alliance obeyed. Human cruisers and alien drones focused fire. Lasers burned, missiles rained. A Titan shook, its shield cracking. Red light flickered across its hull, and then with one final barrage it erupted into a storm of fire. For the first time a Titan had fallen. The fleets roared with cheers even as death surrounded them. Hope blazed. Humanity had cracked the enemy's greatest weapon. Still the war was far from over. The harvesters surged forward. Endless waves. The Alliance lost ship after ship. Earth's defenses strained. Families watched the skies with tears. Cities braced for impact if the fleets failed. David pressed his hands to the console, his voice low. We can't hold forever. The generals knew it too. Yet no one gave the order to retreat. Humanity would stand. They had no other choice. The final stage of the battle ignited near Earth itself. The sky filled with burning wrecks. Warships dueled in orbit. Fighters streaked past flaming debris. Missiles rained down like shooting stars. The moon shook under bombardments, its surface cracked with fresh scars. Amid the chaos, David remembered the last line of the original message, a fragment never fully understood. The smallest spark can burn the darkest void. He whispered it, and suddenly he understood. It was not about ships. It was not about weapons. It was about humans themselves. Humans who never gave up, who fought even when hope was gone. He relayed the words across the comms. We are the spark. Hold the line. Fight to the last breath. His voice carried through the static, through the fear, through the despair, and the fleets answered with fire. Together, humans and their alien allies struck again and again. Titan after Titan cracked. Harvester fleets shattered. The cost was beyond counting. The Alliance was bleeding. But they held at last. The harvesters began to falter. Their formations broke. Their endless tide slowed. For the first time they retreated. The red light of their ships fading into the darkness. The solar system was scarred. Millions were gone. Fleets reduced to wreckage. But Earth still stood. The Alliance still lived. Humanity had faced the final war and endured. David looked out at the broken sky, debris glowing like fallen stars, his voice soft but steady. We were never meant to hear the message, but we did, and because of that, the galaxy still has a chance. The war was not finished. The harvesters would return, but humanity had survived the storm, and the smallest spark had proven strong enough to light the darkest night. Wreckage drifted like ghosts in the silence of space. Broken ships floated in endless orbit, glowing faintly with fire that refused to die. The solar system was scarred. Earth's skies were filled with trails of smoke and falling debris. The harvesters had retreated, but the cost of survival was carved deep into every soul. The first war was over, but it had left humanity changed forever. Across Earth, people filled the streets. Some wept for the lost, some sang for the living, and some simply stood in silence, staring at the stars. They knew the fight was not finished, but they also knew something greater. For the first time, humanity had looked into the abyss of the galaxy and had not broken. They had endured in the command halls. The surviving generals studied maps of ruined fleets, their voices heavy with loss. Yet in their eyes burned something fierce. Resolve. The harvesters were not invincible. They had bled. They had retreated. They could be defeated. The observer ship still hovered in orbit, its dark hull scarred from the war. For days it had remained silent, watching. Then at last its deep voice echoed again. The signal was not meant for you, but you heard, you fought, you lived. David stood before the transmission, his face pale with exhaustion but steady. We weren't supposed to be part of this, he said, and yet we are. The alien voice answered, yes, the message was for another, a race older, stronger, but they fell before the war reached them. The galaxy was left with silence until you broke it. The word spread through every surviving fleet, through every city still standing. Humanity had not been chosen, but they had chosen themselves. That truth was more powerful than destiny. Then the observer released one final fragment of the original signal. A piece never unlocked before, it glowed across the screens, lines of code that became a star map. At the center pulsed a single bright mark, the harvester core, the heart of their swarm. The voice was clear. The war is not finished, but its end can be written. This is their origin, their nest. Destroy it, and the galaxy is free. Silence filled the chamber. For the first time, the enemy had a weakness. The war was no longer endless. There was a path. David's voice broke the silence. Then we are the ones who must do it. The generals nodded. The fleets would rebuild. The alliance would rise again. Humanity had carried the message this far, and they would carry it to the end, on Earth. Workers returned to the shipyards. Cities rebuilt faster than ever. Families grieved but also gave their hands, their strength, their hearts. Everyone understood now. The fight was no longer just for Earth. It was for every star, every world, every voice that had been silenced by the harvesters. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. They were fighting for the galaxy. And across the surviving alien drones, a strange change appeared. They began to follow human orders more directly, as if recognizing them as leaders of the alliance. For the first time, the ancient watchers bent to the will of the youngest race. David stood at the edge of a great hangar, staring at the next generation of ships. Larger, brighter, faster, each. One carried alien designs but human spirit. He touched the cold metal of one hull and whispered, "We were never meant to hear the message, but maybe the message was meant to find someone who would refuse to surrender." Years would pass, battles would continue, and the harvesters would return in storms of fire. But the galaxy had already changed. Humanity had proven that even the smallest spark could ignite the stars. On the day the rebuilt fleet launched, millions watched from Earth. Warships rose into the sky, their engines burning bright like dawn. Children waved, soldiers saluted, families cried and cheered. It was not the end, but a beginning. David spoke to the gathered world. His voice carried through every screen, every speaker. The message was not for us, but we answered it. The galaxy is not alone, and we will never be silent again. The fleets vanished into the darkness of space, carrying hope, fear, and fire. Behind them, Earth glowed like a single jewel, fragile yet unbroken. Ahead of them, the harvester core waited. The war for the galaxy had only just begun. But for the first time, there was a chance. Humanity had taken the message, and with it, they had saved not only themselves but every star that still shined. The observer's final words lingered in David's mind as the fleet disappeared into the void. The message was not for humans, but only humans could hear it, and only humans could answer. And so the story of Earth, once a quiet world, became the story of a galaxy saved by those who were never meant to fight but fought anyway.